He was talking last year about a moment of spiritual rebirth. He had been to Peru. He was relaunching his life and career. And now, not a year after that, we are mourning his death.
Avicii quickly became one of the hottest producers in the music industry. Collaborating with superstars like Beyoncé and Coldplay.
He was one of a kind, producing the beat of a generation.
Released in 2013, Avicii's most famous song, Wake Me Up, became the most streamed song on Spotify that year.
An innovator, one of only a handful of DJs who transcended turntables to become a solo artist and sought-after producer. The music world shocked at his passing.
The music industry was stunned today by the death of one of its biggest stars at the age of...
The 28-year-old super producer behind hits by Madonna and Coldplay found dead at a hotel Friday in Oman, seen here just days ago with fans. Even if you didn't know his name, you undoubtedly heard his prolific music. The Swedish DJ, born Tim Bergling, began mixing at 16. Quickly gaining fame, he started touring at age 18.
At a very young age, it is likely that his pancreatitis was due to his lifestyle, to his partying. He is someone who was making millions of dollars a weekend, DJing all over the world. This is a very big business. He lived a life of excess and celebration. That kind of feeling is reflected in the music he was playing to these massive crowds, but he lived it a little too large.
Saying at one point, "I'll never let go of music."
Like the wind, we'll be wild and free.
Swedish DJ and producer Avicii's cause of death appears to have been a suicide. His family has released a statement about his death, saying he could not go on any longer. The statement from the DJ's family implies that he took his own life. Reading in part, he really struggled with thoughts about meaning, life, and happiness before his death. He wanted to find peace. Today's note from his family touched on Avicii's complicated relationship with the music industry and his own success, saying, quote, "Tim was not made for the business machine he found himself in. He was a sensitive guy who loved his fans but shunned the spotlight."
His death comes days after he was nominated for yet another Billboard Music Award.
What an impact, though, and that music.
Seriously.
Such a talent, gone too soon.
His last performance was in Ibiza, I believe in 2016, and you saw the size of the crowds. I mean, this is an age where DJs can become one-word artists, that everybody knows your name. You sell out auditoriums. But he talked a lot about being introverted and how he never intended on being the center of attention.
That's why he stepped back a couple of years ago.
He was talking last year about a moment of spiritual rebirth. He had been to Peru. He was relaunching his life and career. And now, not a year after that, we are mourning his death. And he also talked about a cross-country road trip he took in the U.S. to help him reach the decision.
The paintings and life story of Vincent van Gogh would appear to make the case that there's a connection between great art and madness.
They are highly expressive, and they're certainly informed by what must have been, these awful experiences of mental breakdowns.
Mary Morton, curator of French paintings at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, says this self-portrait was painted in a mental asylum. Months later, Van Gogh is widely believed to have committed suicide. And he is just one of scores of visual artists, writers, musicians, and other creative people who are known or believed to have suffered from mental illness.
Study after study after study has shown that there is a disproportionate rate of mood disorders, in particular in highly creative people.
Kay Redfield Jamison is professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and is considered a leading expert on mood disorders in artists.
What is known about what goes on in the brain that might create a relationship between mania of some kind and creativity?
One of the things that has been observed since mania was first written about is that people have more energy, more drive, they take more risks. It's also the profound despair that comes from depression that gives them a different kind of appreciation of the human condition.
Hey, brother. The constant touring took its toll. He suffered from acute pancreatitis, reportedly from excessive drinking. In 2016, he retired from touring, and in a post to his fans, he wrote, "It really helped me realize that I needed to make the change that I'd been struggling with for a while." Sky comes falling down for you. Yet he continued to record and produce hits for artists around the world up until his death. Without you, I feel lost at sea. Saying at one point, "I'll never let go of music." Like the wind, we'll be wild and free.
And yet, just days ago, he was nominated for a Billboard Music Award. Was he still making music? What was he up to?
So he did share with us some new music last summer. He was talking about a new chapter of his life. And a new chapter of his life, the kind of thing that people usually talk about in their 40s, 50s, or 60s, to be honest. He was still a very young man, and he had lived quite a lot by that time.
Indeed, he had a short, fast life that ends too soon at age 28.
I want to talk about a couple of other people that you've written about. Take Ernest Hemingway.
Well, I think that Hemingway had a very complicated view of his own illness. And for example, when Scott Fitzgerald wrote his great essays about depression, the crack-up, Hemingway was scathing in his criticism of Fitzgerald for having gone public about having been mentally ill.
Since then, dozens of artists have struggled publicly with their mental illness. Michael Angelakos is founder of the indie band Passion Pit. Cool enough to land on Letterman. He says some of his most popular songs reflect his ongoing battle with bipolar disorder.
Were there periods where you couldn't work at all, where you just felt despondent?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, most of my 20s was taken over by depressive periods. I would have to literally fling myself up into a manic state to get things done. It pretty much ruined my life in my 20s, absolutely.
Today, at 30, Angelakos is taking medication and also undergoing electroconvulsive therapy, options not available to many artists of the past. He says he is trying to keep himself on track and also raise money and awareness.
Was his 2011 hit Levels that catapulted Avicii to #1 on the dance music charts in the United States and across Europe. Avicii quickly became one of the hottest producers in the music industry.
Over the past several years, he suffered from pancreatitis brought on by heavy drinking, as highlighted in the documentary Avicii: True Stories on Netflix.
If you just do this, this is going to be the answer. This is going to fix and fill in that void in your life, and you're going to feel complete and fulfilled and satisfied. And so we go through life looking for the perfect career, looking for the perfect spouse, looking for the perfect house. We look for the perfect car. Everything in life always has a new car smell to it for a while. And as I got in mine tonight, I thought, mine smells like pizza. And it never lasts, because there's nothing about this world that has any lasting power towards it. Because death, because of sin, is the thematic force of the universe, and everything around us will eventually age and die. But you see, the enemy of our soul understands this weakness within us. And so he basically is always trying to come in and say, you know what, if you just do this, this is going to be the answer. This is going to fix and fill in that void in your life, and you're going to feel complete and fulfilled and satisfied. See, the Bible's answer to that question of what's wrong with the world is really both reasonable and I think realistic. It's summed up in one word. It's the word sin. And it's interesting that sin is the thing that was wrong with the world, because sin has led the world to a state of irreparable brokenness. See, what the Bible does is it places the blame squarely on the shoulders of mankind, telling us the world is a wicked place because of mankind's, your and my, rebellion against our Creator. I'm convinced that it is the factualness of this truth that is the real reason why people object to the opening chapters of the book of Genesis. Because if it's true, then we're sinners in rebellion against God. And that's one of the hardest things for people to own. In the fact that God places that responsibility on everything that is wrong in the world on mankind, not only collectively, but even individually as well, makes it hard for us to really square up to it. The real issue is not the ifs of my life, it's me. It's the denial that there's also this evil within me that aids and abets both the good and the bad things that happen in my life. It's almost like magnetically it draws me to the evil that's outside of me. That the evil in me is attracted to the evil outside of me, so that in the end of the day, it's not just a matter of me being the consequence of whatever experiences or life, environmental connections I've had. It really comes down to the fact that I make choices often out of a selfish and deceptive motivation. I love what Paul Tripp said on this. He said, what you and I really need is to be rescued from ourselves. We are the biggest danger to ourselves.
Rogen's laid-back manner has managed to deliver some hilarious moments in film over the past 10 years.
Lately, he's also been using humor to benefit an important cause. Jamie Wax is here with more. Jamie, good morning.
Good morning, Dana. Seth Rogen's known for movies like Knocked Up and The 40-Year-Old Virgin, but less well known, the star-studded comedy variety fundraiser he and his wife created, this year available on Netflix. It's a honestly, really fresh updating of the classic variety show. Is that what y'all were going for with it?
Yeah, I mean, we really want to make a show where you don't know what's going to happen, where it's completely kind of unexpected from one moment to the next.
Hilarity for Charity's on Netflix now. I should say it is very adult but very creative. And Rogen's wife, Lauren, wrote and directed a movie called Like Father that will premiere on Netflix this summer.
The tragic and bitter battle to keep him alive reverberating across the world.
The toddler had spent the last 18 months of his life in intensive care, being treated for a rare degenerative brain disorder.
If a society is best judged by the quality of its mercy, well, Britain's socialized medical system appears to be failing that test.
Diagnosed with a rare brain condition which doctors said was impossible to treat, arguing in court that he should be taken off life support. His parents fighting back.
No one, and I repeat, no one in this country has taken my boy away from me.
But a judge ruled in the local doctor's favour to end his suffering. A move condemned by officials in the largely Catholic Poland who criticised the health service in the United Kingdom.
He was taken off life support by court order on Monday. Yesterday, an appeals court refused to let Alfie's parents take him to Italy, which is offering an alternative treatment and citizenship.
A Vatican hospital offering to treat the toddler, but those efforts rejected by courts, who ruled there was no prospect of recovery.
There was a picture yesterday of this hospital, Alderhay Hospital in the northwest of England, with 20 uniformed police officers standing outside the door of the hospital to stop little Alfie being taken out and to stop protesters from getting in, using the police to keep the child in the hospital.
It's the second time in less than a year a UK judge ruled a child be taken off life support.
Who died in London last year, a court denying his parents' petition to take him to America for experimental treatment.
Mourners gathered to pay their respect to Alfie Evans' short life. But his death has reignited an international debate over who should decide for end-of-life care for sick children.
So this gets to the absolute heart of how much freedom does the individual have? How much decision-making process do the parents have? Yeah. Or are our children now owned by the state? Frankly, what is happening today, what is happening right now, is a form of state-sponsored euthanasia, and I hate it.
This next story sounds like it comes straight out of some dark science fiction novel, but it's unfortunately part of the culture of death today. At a funeral fair in Amsterdam last week, that's right, a funeral fair, a well-known euthanasia advocate unveiled a suicide machine.
Visitors to the fair used virtual reality glasses to simulate the experience. Nishka and Dutch designer Alexander Banning hope to build the first functioning Sarco by the end of the year. Philip Nitschke unveiled his so-called suicide machine at a funeral fair in Amsterdam last week.
My designer, Alexander, who's come over all the way from the Netherlands, has been involved in a very important aspect of the Sarco, which is that it can be 3D printed. So that's the device seen here, depicted at sunrise in some field, and I guess you can put the device wherever you like. Really, you can take it up and park it on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific, I guess, waiting for the sunset. But once you climb into the Sarco and press the button, you will peacefully die in the same way, I guess, as a roller coaster, with euphoria and, I would suggest, elegance.
Philip Nitschke designed what he's calling the Sarco. The Sarco capsule comes with a detachable coffin and a hookup for a nitrogen container. And what's a devastating invention, if someone wants to commit suicide, they go in the Sarco capsule, press a button, and they are killed once it's filled with nitrogen. This euthanasia advocate, Philip Nitschke, said as a medical student, he was inspired by Jack Kevorkian, or Dr. Death, who assisted in at least 130 suicides. But doctors are not meant to kill. No one is.
Anyone who can climb into this machine and press a button inside will peacefully die. Now, Alex, say a few words, please.
This was probably the one
assignment that I didn't see coming, and it took a little while for me in order to know for myself if I wanted to help, because this subject for you is all very natural and it's well embedded in your life.
A contained area, which is the base, which has a little area which pulls back out, and you can fill it up with liquid nitrogen in a special thermos flask. Then it's loaded. A person, when they satisfy the security requirements, and I'll say a little bit more about that later, get into the machine, the canopy closes. If they press the button inside, no one else can press it, has to be pressed from inside. The liquid nitrogen floods out across a series of evaporators in the base here and boils rapidly. And what happens is that there's a sudden movement of gas into this top part. It pushes the air out, and we've done tests monitoring the oxygen level, and it drops down to levels which would bring quick loss of consciousness in less than a minute. It's rapid. And so a person in there would experience a short period of euphoria, perhaps, certainly not a painful experience before they lost consciousness, and then they're effectively in a zero oxygen environment, and so death follows within a few minutes.
One biomedical ethics professor and a member of the Pontifical Academy for Life, Daniel Solmasi, criticized this invention as bad medicine, ethics, and bad public policy. Solmasi told Newsweek it converts killing into a form of healing and doesn't acknowledge that we can now do more for symptoms through palliative care than ever before.
I thought to myself, I can see a world where people who want a peaceful death, reliable at the time of their choosing, should be able to have that option. And I can see something like this for common use as a way of solving that issue.
Emerged that Australia's most controversial euthanasia activist is linked to the deaths of 3 women at Ephraim Island. An elderly mother and her 2 daughters are suspected of making a suicide pact following contact with Philip Nitschke.
An elderly Hervey Bay couple has died in one of 2 apparent suicide pacts in just 2 days. The couple, aged in their 60s, took their own lives last night. On Wednesday, police in Mooloolaba found the bodies of another couple. Authorities believe their death was carefully planned after attending assisted suicide workshops hosted by controversial euthanasia advocate Dr. Philip Nitschke.
He's lab tested most options, and number 1 on Nitschke's list.
The premier drug for ending life is Nembutal, the barbiturate.
And Nitschke, predictably dubbed Dr. Death in the press, is selling Nembutal testing kits.
The amount needed to turn it back into a colourless liquid gives you an idea of what the strength of the Nembutal must have been in this bottle.
But this is information, not encouragement.
I would argue that.
Nembutal is available in Mexico, and Nitschke has accompanied terminally ill patients to buy the drug.
$30 a bottle, no questions asked.
You pour it into a glass and you drink it, you follow it up with your whiskey, and I've never seen anyone finish their whiskey. They put the glass down and they're gone to sleep. And death follows shortly thereafter. To the outside observer, nothing looks more peaceful.
And inside?
We may never know. We may never know.
Are you religious?
No.
At all?
No.
Creating a suicide machine sends the message that some people are better off dead. But we know that's not the truth. As long as you have a beat in your heart, a breath in your lungs, as long as you've got life in you, know that the author of life, God our Father, has a purpose for you here today. But our next guest reminds us of that same essential message using her own words today. Leah Darrow is a former model and author of the new book, The Other Side of Beauty. You know, Leah, on EWTN Pro Life Weekly, we often are addressing abortion, but abortion, contraception, cohabitation, they're all connected to the body.
Absolutely. There's a huge connection, and I think anybody of faith knows that. Cohabitation, sex outside of marriage, abortion, contraception, all of these things have been brought into our world in some effort to liberate us. But we've never asked from what. And we never asked, who is the one saying this? And there is a voice in this world that wants to liberate us, in a sense, from truth, from God. And that voice does not come from God. That voice is evil. We've made our bodies in particular idols. They're golden calves everywhere. We worship them. I mean, how often do we really think about our spiritual life? How often do we think about our soul? You know, I mean, so often, you know, we could get on the scale and see the progress that we've made. What if we got on the scale and it told us the progress of our soul?
We have shocking video of what's going on in one of the busiest BART stations in the Bay Area.
Open IV drug use, unconscious men and women, piles of vomit on either side of the hallways.
And one morning I got to pull out the camera. I got to show my friends this. They're not going to believe it. I mean, you can see there's dozens of them. And needles everywhere, crack, heroin.
And like cities across the country, they have a problem.
I'm looking for the needles so nobody gets poked.
I see needles, I see OD, I see drugs being sold, drugs being done, drugs being stuffed in their mouths.
But so far, both the city and BART have proven no match for a human crisis that offers no easy solutions. Has this problem just gotten markedly worse recently?
Yes, it has. Well, on a recent BART trip, one of our reporters came across hypodermic needles.
BART admits it is simply overwhelmed by the crisis that has landed in its hallways.
We're in the midst of a national homelessness crisis, and we're also in the middle of a national drug crisis.
Right now, our entire region is struggling to find answers for an explosion of homelessness and cheap, powerful narcotics. And if you're BART, well, you are not immune to the problems in the communities you serve. So this, for now, is the status quo, a daily commute through a human crisis that shows no end.
You feel bad for these people in a way. I mean, because you are human and you see them. This isn't going anywhere, it looks like. It's just getting worse.
The survey by health service company Cigna showed that nearly half of Americans say they sometimes or always feel alone.
And if you're thinking this is all just fear-mongering and that people have always felt like this, well, you'd be wrong. The percentage of Americans who reported feeling lonely was around 15% in the 1970s and 1980s. And as has been called by many in the medical profession, loneliness is a modern-day epidemic. So how can over 300 million people in the United States on this planet of 7 billion be so isolated from each other? Or at the very least, feel like they are?
Being lonely is not just about being alone. Psychologists say you can be surrounded by people, but still feel isolated.
One feels a sense of emptiness, kind of like an emptiness of the soul.
That's a great question, and I think it's one of those topics that's easy to overlook. Mental health and that feeling of isolation. You know, you wouldn't have nearly as many shootings and things like that, I believe, if people weren't dealing with the mental issues that we're dealing with in today's day and age. And loneliness is a major factor. If someone's feeling alone and isolated, they are far more liable to then kind of move into hate and move into blame and move into those kind of things.
Well, emotional isolation, more commonly known as loneliness, has been proven by vigorous research to have negative health outcomes. So in a lonely person, their immune system is so overworked that it leads to higher incidences of things like cancer, neurodegenerative diseases, heart diseases. It literally changes your blood.
One feels a sense of emptiness, kind of like an emptiness of the soul.
More people died in 2016 from overdose than the sum total of all the Americans who died in the 20 years of the Vietnam War. That is startling.
Do they want to hear that I'm sorry because I represent the drug dealer that sold them the drugs at that point? But more than anything, I wanted them to understand the reality and the truth about addiction, that their kids weren't themselves.
For the first time in our nation's history, heroin is killing more people than guns.
But the death toll itself doesn't tell half the story.
The opioid cocktails are more dangerous now than ever.
This is a whole other demon, and you can't get it off your back.
So we're gonna do what we have to do to beat the monster.
The woman charged with killing her mother, then gouging out her eyes, will remain behind bars.
After admitting to killing her own mother, Camille Bala told detectives near Palm Beach she smoked marijuana that she believed was laced with flakka or PCP. During her drug-fueled rampage, Bala gouged out her mother's eyes.
They have superhuman strength, they're psychotic, belligerent. It takes a lot of people to hold them down.
People like these, often stripping off their clothes as their temperatures soar up to 105 degrees.
We're calling it the devil's drug.
Ray Rapaglia runs a drug rehab center in Fort Lauderdale and says flakka.
Odd and dangerous, even illegal behavior at some points reported by coworkers of a local pediatrician.
Shocked, a North Texas pediatrician suspended from his practice for bizarre and dangerous acts.
Yeah, we have some documents, Doug. They show red flags that go back to January or so that ended essentially last Thursday when this pediatrician of more than 20 years showed up to his office this year in his pajamas, sobbing and essentially having a breakdown.
Place for activity.
Trouble for Dr. Kurt Flagger started just days into the new year. Parents leaving appointments today tried to make sense of it all, which gets more difficult as the allegations go on, like when coworkers heard him yelling Satan with families and prayed aloud from the Old Testament, slapped a subordinate on the buttocks and kissed another, or wore the same sweatpants and red shirt to work 3 days in a row. He started bringing a dog into the office, rolling around with it in the hallways as patients and families were walking through. He started showing up late, missing appointments. He was arriving with slurred speech. Get this, in a matter of weeks, he told a coworker on one occasion he was late because he was having sex with his fiancée. In January, they said it started when he was roughhousing with a 2-year-old, tried to throw him on his shoulder and missed, dropping the child onto the ground and onto his head. Then he became very bizarre in the months that followed, according to the documents, praying aloud from the Old Testament. And there's much more that we couldn't quite fit into this piece. He started running late a lot and returning to the office with slurred speech.
Now to that mid-air scare we mentioned at the top. A passenger tried to open the door of a plane in flight today.
I am God! 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 I am God!
Passengers on board United Express Flight 5449 restrained this Boise, Idaho woman who was ranting about being God.
She appears to be saying, "I am God," repeatedly. This happened on a SkyWest.
As another man holds her down in the aisle. Moments earlier, she'd tried to open the aircraft door while the plane was in flight, traveling from San Francisco to Boise this morning.
We're not as inclined to accept them in our program because we know that they might relapse. They pose safety threats to the rest of our residents.
But he decided to take a chance on Stephanie. Now 8 months clean and living, she says, for her daughter.
I know for sure that I'm lucky to be alive right now. It's by the grace of God that I'm alive.
142 Americans a day are dying from overdose.
Telling me he has never seen anything quite like the grip prescription pills has on our communities.
I don't know how many people I know that are hooked on Adderall, but they believe because it's prescribed that it's okay.
Insisting big-time dealers and drug gangs don't have to bother selling pills. The pharmaceutical companies have flooded America with enough pills to create an unlimited supply of addicts.
Those pharmaceutical companies can buy out our own government and allow them to knowingly produce narcotics that they know are going to get the people hooked.
Once hooked on painkillers, Robert says it's easy to convince someone heroin is cheaper and stronger.
We don't have the numbers on the lost jobs, the broken marriages, the children who've been sent into foster care by this crisis.
You're constantly in a state of I hurt, so my body feels like it needs to heal itself.
Wow.
Yeah.
And look, that's one of those important things. I mean, in prehistoric society, when you go back and look at those, the worst thing that could happen to somebody is getting thrown out of the group or kicked out of the tribe or whatever. That on a prehistoric level, that's a death sentence.
Yeah.
So, yes, we're not at that level anymore, but that doesn't mean that feeling of isolation also can't be a death sentence.
No, it can be. And that's the thing that we don't think about, is that taking yourself, whether it's, we sort of break up into tribes. Everybody has to have their tribe. They have to have their place where they belong so they can tell everybody else that I belong in this group. But then there's a whole bunch of people who are left out when there isn't this perfect tribe, as we all become more individualistic, I guess. So
thank you, political parties. Thank you.
I know, right? Great job, guys. You really made it easier for all of us. But a 28-year-old advertising executive in the UK a couple of years ago in an article had described loneliness in the millennial world and for dating and for women, saying, when we're all cohabitating but not necessarily romantically entwined, it's possible to feel deeply lonely, even when your house is full of people and you're going out all the time. Shagging people you don't love can make you feel lonely. Dating apps are bleak. Admitting you're lonely as a single woman is especially noxious. Nobody wants to come across like a desperate, warty old maid, so we pretend we're not lonely. So I say, Ty and me, I admit it, I'm lonely sometimes, not in like the creepy way, but we have to just admit that we need people. We can't always do it alone.
We need people, and we got to start reaching out. You want to change the world, you got to be inclusive, not exclusive.
Leah Darrow first gained attention when she competed on the reality TV show America's Next Top Model. She now speaks and writes about chastity, modesty, and true empowerment for women. I had the chance to sit down with Leah Darrow last week. One of our interview, Darrow and I discuss how the way we view our body has been warped in our society and contributes to the culture of death.
Leah Darrow, thanks for being with us today.
Absolutely.
We're here at a conference all about ending sexual exploitation. There's widespread pornography addiction, sexual assault pervaded into our culture. How did we get here?
How do we get here? Well, Humanae Vitae speaks a lot to that. We've reduced the human person to parts. That's happened over a very long time. This whole idea of sexual liberation does not liberate women at all. It does not help our culture at all. We've been reduced to parts, women in particular. We don't really know who we are. And when you don't know who you are, then you don't know how to act. We've forgotten the basic sense of human dignity, that our dignity is rooted in our creation. And when you break apart that, when you forget that, when you have some type of spiritual amnesia, then the actions that flow out of the human person become disordered as well.
You and I have both only lived in a post-Roe v. Wade world where women are encouraged to say, my body, my choice. But how does that affect the way we as women view our bodies?
Right. Well, I think number one, it pits women against women too. It's my body, my choice. And so we want to completely sever the connection with the sexual act, with procreation, with the fact that it actually could produce another person. My body, my choice doesn't hold up because there's another body in your body. And that's not your choice. And the choice that you made with your body, with another body, can produce another body. There's a lot of bodies there. But there's that idea. It doesn't hold up. There's no proof that is liberating women. There's no proof that actually helps women. And we see time and time again all the problems in our culture come back to this place of really forgetting once again who we are, what we've been made for, and how to act the way that we've been created.
It also showed that social media use alone is not a predictor of loneliness, as many have thought. That students have higher loneliness scores than retirees.
But I also think there is something to social media in itself of a Facebook feed. Everybody looks happy.
Yeah, Jason, there's been some contradicting studies on the impact of social media on loneliness.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing to figure out because the Cigna report found no correlation with loneliness and social media use. And part of that is because everyone in that age group is using social media, right?
Leah, you have modeled in the fashion industry, and often when we think of fashion, we automatically think of beauty. But as you write in your new book, The Other Side of Beauty, there is an ugly side to that. In your opinion, how does the beauty industry warp the way we view our bodies?
Well, I think you absolutely hit on right there. It does exactly that. It warps. And so the beauty industry, we think that it's our friend because it's the beauty industry. And
It makes us look good.
And we want to be beautiful.
Right.
Okay, once again, there's no problem with that in and of itself. Beauty is not the enemy. That's really important to remember. Beauty is an attribute of God. Beauty is not owned by Chanel. It is not owned by Dolce & Gabbana. It is a piece of God. It is how we come to know and experience God. And so with the beauty being an attribute of God, we have to understand that the world, because the world is broken and we're broken people, it's disordered it to an extent where women once again are reduced to parts. Or also we seek our value and our worth in this disordered type of beauty. There's a beauty standard that's out there today that we have willingly accepted that says that we have to be a certain number on the scale. Our hair's got to be super shiny. Teeth have got to be straight. And if you don't look like the girls in the magazine, if you don't look like the girls on Instagram, then you're just not good enough. And so there's a constant feeling of comparison. And we're always comparing ourselves as women to other women, which is not at all what we have been created to do or to be.
Je me battrai de toutes mes forces contre la division qui nous mine et nous abat. C'est ainsi que nous pourrons rendre au peuple français, à chacune et chacun d'entre vous, dans sa vie professionnelle, personnelle et familiale, les chances que la France lui doit. Aimons la France. À compter de ce soir, et pour les 5 années qui viennent, je vais avec humilité, avec dévouement, avec détermination, la servir en votre nom.
Well, coming after Nicolas Sarkozy's controversially bling mandate and François Hollande's self-declared normal tenure, Emmanuel Macron has described his presidential style as Jovian, this in reference to the Greek god Jupiter.
Emmanuel Macron is just arriving now. That is the scene. The victorious president-elect.
Emmanuel Macron, the charismatic 39-year-old former banker.
He will become the country's youngest leader after Napoleon and the first elected president outside France's 2 main political parties.
France's youngest president ever, here dubbed Le Kid.
Centrist candidate Emmanuel Macron has won the French presidential election, easily beating far-right candidate Marine Le Pen.
C'est un omniprésident. Voilà, vous permettrez ce néologisme, c'est-à-dire.
He's an omnipresent president. He wants to be in charge of everything all the time, but that's very dangerous.
Former investment banker and former cabinet minister who has never run for public office before has been elected the next president of France. He does not come from either of the main traditional political parties.
Now, Macron got a lot of slack when he used that word Jovian. What does he mean by it?
Emmanuel Macron is a young president. He's the youngest French president ever to be elected. His predecessors Nicolas Sarkozy and François Hollande somewhat mishandled the presidential office. Emmanuel Macron believes that power should be vertical. He is, therefore, a Jovian president. France perhaps needed this monarchical image to be at peace with itself.
And he was an unknown quantity when he took power. Has the exercise, the reality of power, had an impact on that Jovian, above-the-fray image?
For Macron, being a Jovian president is a way to establish his authority. He establishes his authority, and at the same time he wants to bring people together. And to do so, he needs to have this above-the-fray image. This is what enabled him to launch his own political movement, even before the election.
Emmanuel Macron has also been very active internationally. He's taken a keen interest in crises such as Lebanon, Syria and Jerusalem. Keeping up with Emmanuel Macron isn't easy. The energetic young president has thrown himself into a frenzy of activity at home and abroad since being elected in May.
And there were unflattering media reports about his wife, Macron's former high school teacher, 24 years his senior.
Everybody understands that he's hugely intelligent. He's always been the smartest guy in the class. He's a very, very tough negotiator, very stubborn. He's a lot tougher than you think.
The handshakes, the hugs, the backslaps, the bromance.
Thank you very much. In fact, I'll get that little piece of dandruff for little piece. We have to make him perfect. He is perfect.
The French gave their support loudly and clearly for Macron and for a united Europe.
In terms of Europe's defense and autonomy, we now have a foundation for that, which has emerged over the past few months. In June last, we have laid the foundation of this Europe of defense with a permanent structured cooperation between our countries, allowing us to take increased commitments to move ahead together and better coordinate and even have a European fund for defense. What Europe is lacking today, what this Europe of defense is lacking today, is a common strategic culture. Our inability to work together in a convincing manner challenges our credibility as Europeans. We do not have the same parliamentarian, historical, political cultures. We do not have the same mentalities, and certainly we're not going to change that overnight. But I suggest that we should start creating this common, this shared culture by putting together a European intervention culture. And in order to do that, we need profound change. At the beginning of the next decade, as a result, Europe will have to have a common intervention force, a common budget, and a common doctrine to act.
It is my privilege here today to take the floor before you. I know to whom I owe that privilege. I owe that privilege to all of those who, just over 70 years ago, rose up against the barbaric regime that had seized my country, France. I owe it to those nations that heard our cry of resistance. I also owe that privilege to those who, once the war had ended, dared to take the path of reconciliation and to build a new international order. Multilateralism, the multilateral approach, is facing a challenge in meeting the challenges of nuclear proliferation. Pyongyang has crossed a major threshold in military escalation. Allow us to acknowledge it's the stakes. Our responsibility, together with all of our partners, including China and Russia, is through resolve to bring North Korea to the negotiation table for a political settlement to this conflict. France rejects escalation and will not close any door to dialogue, provided that the conditions are brought together for a dialogue in favor of peace.
What an extraordinary day. Thousands of reporters from all around the world here just south of the demilitarized zone to witness this historic and emotional summit. Just weeks ago, this whole region seemed under the looming threat of war. But these two men, the leaders of the two Koreas, in striking symbolism and long talks, are trying to bring, in Kim Jong-un's words, a new era of peace.
The two men, so different, seem to enjoy it all, chatting among the trees on a picnic bench alone for almost 45 minutes. The two leaders promising to sign a peace treaty this year, formally ending the Korean War and pledging the denuclearization of the peninsula. Arms raised in triumph, and then an awkward embrace. Afterwards, Kim Jong-un stepping out onto the world stage as a statesman for the first time, saying, "We are one nation and cannot be separated. We are one blood." With that promise of peace, North Korea also agreeing to diplomatic talks with the U.S. It will be the first time any sitting U.S. president will meet with a North Korean leader.
Things have changed very radically from a few months ago. You know, the name calling and a lot of other things. They're treating us with great respect.
It's an astonishing turn of events.
And it is the same objective that I would like to speak in favor of the nuclear agreement with Iran. We put together a solid, robust and verifiable agreement with Iran that will ensure that Iran does not obtain nuclear weapons. Renouncing it would be a grave error. It would be irresponsible for us to fail to uphold that agreement, because this is a good agreement, an agreement that's essential to peace, at a time when a downward spiral cannot be discounted. Thanks to dialogue, we have managed to resolve the Iranian situation. Dialogue, multilateralism is the only way forward, and that applies to North Korea too.
Because this was not a U.S. treaty, this international agreement. It was international. You have Russia, China, France, Germany, the UK, EU, and the U.S. signing on, along with Iran. Netanyahu wants the U.S. to pull out of the 2015 deal, which froze Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. Last week, the leaders of France and Germany lobbied President Trump to stick with it rather than tear up the deal as promised on the campaign trail.
And Israel is pushing him harder to scrap the agreement. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went on primetime TV in Israel to say that, quote, Iran lied about wanting to build nuclear weapons.
But it does contradict Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif's claim on Face the Nation that Iran's past nuclear program had been for peaceful purposes.
Iran was never racing towards a bomb, and it will not be racing towards a bomb.
Well, Marzia, what you see behind me is one of the largest military parades staged by the Iranian army south of Tehran in a place called the Mausoleum, in front of the mausoleum of the late founder of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. So the Iranian army today in Tehran and across the country, in major cities across the country, are staging large-scale military parade as a show of might and preparedness of the Iranian army. So,
a show of military might. The Iranian army staged countrywide parades on Wednesday to mark the National Army Day.
overnight missile strike targeted government military bases in northern Syria. The group said that Israel likely carried out the assault that killed 26 pro-government fighters, including many Iranians. Social media video showed the purported attack, which hit an arms depot near Hama. Iranian fighters are said to be stationed there, but the Iranian government denied they were hit.
The attack on the Syrian Army's 47th Brigade was so powerful that it registered a 2.6 earthquake.
Today, a top Iranian official has just promised a swift and decisive response to Israel's recent activities in Syria. Earlier this week, missiles struck a Syrian base where potentially dozens of Iranian nationals are believed to have been killed. Israel has remained mum on any involvement, and Syrian state media initially blamed the United States, but top U.S. officials say Israel led the operation. But for Israel to be 100% sure that Iran doesn't develop the bomb, is there any other path besides war? I mean,
look, if there is an alternative, neither Netanyahu nor Trump have put it on the table so far. Because again, we have even the former head of the Mossad backing the claim of the IAEA, who says there is no credible evidence at this time at all that Iran continued to develop a bomb after 2009. Now, it may have held on to this archive, which originally it developed in 2003, which yes, potentially means that Iran did obscure the true intent and the extent of its progress, but without a plan B in place, the world is obviously very anxious to see what's going to happen if and when Trump decides to topple this deal.
I cannot say whether my successor in the far future, in 70 years' time, will have the privilege of speaking before you. Will multilateralism survive this time of doubt and change? In truth, we ought to recall the state of our world 70 years ago, a world that was broken by war, that was stunned by genocide, and we ought to try to regain the optimism that we held up in the face of so many reasons to doubt back then. We must regain faith in what brings us together. We must find trust again in and confidence in these founding values of the United Nations, universal values that protect all individuals across the planet and guarantee their dignity. But the challenge that we face as a generation is to regain our values, to recognize that there is nothing more effective than multilateralism in our current world, because all our challenges are multilateral. War, terrorism, climate change, the digital economy, etc. We can only address those challenges through multilateralism. Not through the law of the fittest, the survival of the fittest, because our vision of the world, if we are to achieve our vision of the world, it's only through multilateralism that we will do that, because our vision is universal, not regional.
And I think that it would be much better that we come together and prevent the divergences increasing.
A new global and shared framework. And this framework should be based on cooperation and multilateralism, and absolutely not on a sort of new hegemony or fascination on new powers. It would be a huge mistake. Which means we have now a tremendous responsibility. Because this new framework, this new compact is the unique way to protect our interest on the long run, our common good, and our people. The answer is partly here, in this room. And in a certain way, our new frontier is not a geographical or a technological one, but it's much more our commitment. We are our own frontier, in our own conscience. If we commit ourselves to make our current globalization more fair, sustainable, in favor of middle classes, if we commit ourselves to enable our youth, if we commit ourselves to take into consideration long-term and complexity of our decisions and not just short-term returns, so we can converge and build a new globalization understandable and good for our people. So this synthesis, which is the core of our globalization and our multilateral approach, was made in Europe. And if we want to avoid this fragmentation of Europe, we need, of the world, sorry, we need a stronger Europe. It's absolutely key. And my view is that we have to redesign a 10-year strategy, because that's not an overnight strategy, a 10-year strategy to make Europe an actual economic, social, green, scientific, and political power. I delivered a very long speech in September last year, and we worked very hard, but I do hope with my friends here present in this room, we will work together to have, at the end of this year, this common strategy for 10 years in order to provide visibility to our people and to the rest of the world about the fact that Europe is able to be this new power and basically to deal with some of those.
Rather, we should think of ways to build a stronger Europe in the world as it is, and as a result create the 6 keys of sovereignty and freedom. And in face of all of these challenges, we need to do a number of concrete things. The first key, the foundation of any political system is safety. In Europe, we're seeing a dual trend. A progressive disengagement and inevitable disengagement of the US, and, on the other hand, a sustainable terrorist phenomenon whose mission is to fracture our free societies. In these areas, at long last, Europe has realized how frail it is and how important it is to act together, to fight against terrorism, to fight terrorist propaganda on the internet. A few of the EU's countries have started doing that together. We need to reinforce our common safety and create a space for common defense and safety. In terms of Europe's defense and autonomy, we now have a foundation for that, which has emerged over the past few months. In June last, we have laid the foundation of this Europe of defense with a permanent, structured cooperation.
But in the 20th century, there were other candidates who rode. Adolf Hitler seemed to be, in many people's mind, the perfect candidate, and he seemed to fit perfectly until, of course, he was defeated and died. And then people began to look at the rise of the European Union, and they say, well, initially there were 10 nations in the European Union, so maybe the European Union is it because there are 10 kings, 10 nations, but today there are 27, and now it's a little bit harder, and they seem to be having their own heart disease, so they're not quite the force or the power that many of us anticipated they might be. Others have even suggested that this is Islam. Now, that's a harder comparison to make, but that final, ultimate, world-crushing Antichrist, whom Paul referred to as the lawless one and Revelation calls the beast, is still yet to rise on the world scene, at least in a recognizable way. It's funny because when John Kennedy was assassinated and took a wound to his head, there were many people who said, well, John Kennedy probably is the Antichrist because he's a Roman Catholic and he got shot to the head. Only problem is he was dead then and he's still dead now. And then Henry Kissinger became a great candidate for a season for reasons I won't know. Some even picked Ronald Reagan, but that was just the Democratic Party. There's been a lot of people who have tried to figure out who exactly is going to be the beast. And I'm not sure that that's even a knowable possibility for you and I at this point, but it is knowable in terms of what is the organ or the vehicle from which he arises, and that becomes, in my mind, even more important. And the question is, what kind of form will this take? Because, again, think about how Daniel described this last world empire. That first of all, he said it would be global in its authority. He was given authority over every tribe, every people, every language, every nation. It's a universal authority, a global authority. Let me tell you the one thing I know for sure. In John 4:3, he says to us, the spirit of the Antichrist is even now in the world. The spirit that empowers him isn't waiting for him to rise. It's already at work in our world right now. But all they did was manifest that same spirit of Antichrist, because this has been the long agenda, as we talked 2 weeks ago.
Mainstream media is outraged by the recent political revelations of rapper Kanye West, but are they telling the full story?
Tonight, some critics saying the talent behind songs like All of the Lights may just be using his latest rant as a boost for album sales.
A highly edited version of an interview the artist did with TMZ dropped on Monday, sparking a feverish attempt by mainstream media outlets to control the narrative of Kanye's remarks.
When you hear about slavery for 400 years, that sounds like a choice. Like, you was there for 400 years and it's all of y'all? You know, like, it's like we're mentally in prison.
West facing immediate backlash from TMZ staffers.
What you're doing right now is actually the absence of thought. I'm appalled, and brother, I am unbelievably hurt by the fact that you have morphed into something, to me, that's not real.
By broadcasting the overtly edited version of Kanye's explosive interview and cherry-picking the most controversial lines from an otherwise nuanced back-and-forth discussion, left-wing media was able to paint a picture of a self-hating black man, an unhinged slavery denier who has been brainwashed into a white supremacist narrative.
Bro, I'm sorry I hurt you.
You gotta be responsible.
No, I'm sorry.
He was so off base on what he said.
Mainstream media has not aired a single moment of the extended version of the interview, which was released a day later, because they are threatened by the coherent messages Kanye had for the black community and for Americans in general on issues like the opioid crisis.
2 days later, I'm in the hospital. I was taking 2 pills a day at that time. When I left the hospital, how many pills you think I was given? 7. I went from taking 2 pills to taking 7.
Or the deception of media.
We are drugged out. We are following other people's opinions. We are controlled by the media. And today it all changes.
Now, 17 months after his November 2016 hospitalization, West disclosing to Charlemagne details of the struggles that led him to seek medical help.
That was the scariest moment of my life.
The hip-hop multi-talent said his 9-day stay at a UCLA medical center, not a breakdown, but a breakthrough, brought on in part by stress from the at-gunpoint robbery of his wife, Kim Kardashian West, in Paris just 1 month earlier.
I'm sorry, there's a family emergency, I have to stop the show.
Went to Paris on that trip to protect her. One of the things that she said that she heard is that they were coming to rob her and they had to wait till I had left.
And in his TMZ interview, revealing this.
I got liposuction because I didn't want y'all to call me fat like y'all called Rob at the wedding. I was addicted to opioids. 2 days I got off of opioids, I'm in the hospital.
And they certainly won't show the moment when Kanye called out the false narrative surrounding racial violence in the U.S.
When I say we have no enemies, we don't have enemies. Black people have a tendency to focus and march when a white person kills a black person or wears a hat. But when it's 700 kids being killed in Chicago, it's okay. It's okay for blacks to kill blacks.
Radio host Charlemagne the God spoke to West in a much anticipated interview released online yesterday.
It's just the next frontier for me.
Nearly 2 hours long, the interview hit on topics like mental health and West's apparent reverence for Donald Trump.
Got a guy like him who's clearly trying to marginalize and oppress people that look like you.
When he was running, it's like I felt something. It's like the fact that he won, it's like it proves something. It proved that anything is possible in America. That Donald Trump could be president of America. I'm not talking about, what he's done since he's been in office, but the fact that he was able to do it.
Kanye's definitely back in the spotlight by his own doing, and this TMZ interview is grabbing everyone's attention.
Do you feel that do you feel that I'm being free and I'm thinking free?
Kanye saying he's about freedom, not conforming.
I just love Trump. I don't have all the answers that a celebrity's supposed to have, but I could tell you, when he was running, it's like I felt something.
The interview was filmed the week before Kanye tweeted this picture of himself,
even tweeting this photo of his own signed Make America Great Again hat.
The African Americans are predominantly Democrat, and anytime somebody breaks from that orthodoxy, they tend to become a target.
We have the right to independent thought, and I independently think that Kanye has lost his mind.
I think it's weird. I think it's disappointing to me.
And getting near unanimous outrage on social media. One person tweeting, to say slavery was a choice isn't only deluded, it's insensitive, it's hateful, and it's demeaning.
It isn't noteworthy for a gossip channel like TMZ to cut a clickbait clip and take inflammatory quotes out of context. But the fact that allegedly reputable journalists from our nation's monolithic liberal news organizations are parroting these tabloid headlines is a stark message about the desperate state the mainstream media is in today. The reason you haven't heard the truth in Kanye's interview is because politics are downwind of culture. And if those shaping the culture open their eyes to the decisiveness of left-wing journalism pushed on television and the internet today, working-class citizens will realize they are being deceived. The unfiltered version of Kanye's thoughts may have received a mere fraction of the views of the politically charged edited version. But the fact that a cultural icon with his level of influence is waking up to the realities of a society that has been systematically deceived, drugged, and divided signifies a tremendous step forward in our cultural evolution.
Kanye's Trump tweets come after a series of bizarre online rants, including the rapper claiming his fashion line will become the biggest apparel company in human history, and saying he has parted ways with his manager and a lawyer. His wife, Kim Kardashian, coming to his defense amid claims he's having a breakdown, tweeting, "Your commentary on Kanye being erratic and his tweets being disturbing is actually scary. So quick to label him as having mental health issues for just being himself."
And this all started with one 7-word tweet last Saturday. "I love the way Candace Owens thinks." I could be a little biased. I love the way Candace Owens thinks as well. But this is really bizarre. And I knew that it was going to be Kanye West to sort of break through this matrix and this group thought on the left, because the one thing that he advocates the most for in his music is independence. And that, to be quite frank, that is now a position on the right. To be a conservative means that you allow independent thinking. They do not allow that on the left whatsoever. So it's curious to see. This is the beginning of what is going to be a very interesting time in Black America. Candace predicted this would happen over a year ago. I first said, if you understand Kanye West, then you can understand the movement of Donald Trump. Like, it's funny to me that people can't correlate that. It's very similar. It's just anti-political correctness.
Literally taking over the TMZ newsroom, telling them he started popping painkillers after having liposuction that ended in his 2016 breakdown that landed him in the hospital for more than a week.
I had plastic surgery because I was trying to look good for y'all. I got liposuction because I didn't want y'all to call me fat.
Rescue 41, psychiatric emergency, Laurel Avenue.
Now fans wonder if the emergency caused his abrupt decision to cancel the remaining 21 appearances of his St. Pablo tour. Just 48 hours earlier, the entertainer arrived at his Sacramento concert over an hour late and sang only 2 songs before this happened.
Stop it.
West ranting for over 15 minutes on everything from the election to even Beyonce and Jay-Z.
Jay-Z, call me, bro. You still ain't called me.
He performed 2 songs and then went on a tirade.
Y'all don't want to lose again. A lot of people here tonight felt like they lost. You know why? Because y'all been lied to. Google lied to you. Facebook lied to you. Radio lied to you.
The artist went on to slam Jay-Z and Beyonce specifically, whom West claims used dirty tricks to win MTV's Video of the Year award.
What was going on before he was hospitalized? West is now getting a psychiatric evaluation in Los Angeles.
It was uncharacteristic of him, but that aside, you know, to cancel a month and a half's worth of tours when a lot of money is on the line, something is pretty wrong here.
Kanye West is one of the most well-known entertainers from Chicago.
But all of Kanye's tweets apparently led some to question his mental health, and that set Kim off. She said the media is trying to demonize Kanye. She called her husband a free thinker and said he was ahead of his time.
Also saying, I believe in people being able to have their own opinions, even if really different from mine. He's a free thinker. Is that not allowed in America?
People will call you a hypocrite if you say, well, you know, when celebrities talk politics, you tell them to shut up because what do they know? You're an actor, just act. But this is different because this comes with a cost. It comes with a cost to his reputation, to his fan base, and to album sales. When people say he's doing this to promote album sales, they don't know his fan base because this is going to hurt him. So he didn't choose the typical cuddly issue that would get him love and props.
I want to put up a tweet that you wrote. You said the masters control everything, including who blacks and even are allowed to like. Kanye tweeted 7 words, and they jumped up and told blacks that they must immediately revolt. How many of you jumped up and did that? How many of you have your minds enslaved?
It's just the truth. It's what I've been preaching about long before Kanye wrote this 7-word tweet that broke the internet, is that they enslaved our bodies, the Democratic Party, but today they have enslaved our minds. They have told us who we must love, who we must hate, what we must think, what ideas are unacceptable. And in the long run, it just doesn't add up. Listen, I think differently. Kanye West thinks differently. I can guarantee you if he and I get in the same room, we will have a lot of disagreements. But the one thing that we will celebrate is our right to think differently. I don't understand what's so controversial for the left to understand this. The way that they have demonized him in the last 72 hours is almost sickening, but at the end of the day, it's going to have adverse effects. I can guarantee you that.
Why are the opinions of rapper Kanye West getting more broadcast coverage than the end of the Korean War? There has been a unilateral media witch hunt against Kanye since he came out in support of President Trump last week by simply wearing a Make America Great Again hat.
2 weeks ago, he tweeted this, quote, "You don't have to agree with Trump, but the mob can't make me not love him. I don't agree with everything anyone does. That's what makes us individuals, and we have the right to independent thought." Exactly.
We're chained to an ideology that just isn't working over the last 50, 60 years. Liberalism, the swallowing of it whole. Our families have been destroyed. Our children lost and confused. Our black men incarcerated and emasculated, and we've moved away from the traditional values that have always defined us. I think we've made a mistake.
it's like we're mentally in prison. Do you feel that I'm feeling, do you feel that I'm being free and I'm thinking free?
I actually don't think you're thinking anything.
TMZ writer Van Lathan went on with his criticism of West, saying his platform shields him from the real-life consequences of his words.
But you know, with great risk comes great reward. I'm sure that it is a lot of people who might have turned their back on Kanye in that moment, but it's a lot of other people who agreed with him. And that's the way the world works. I believe in the rule of 10. 3 people gonna like it, 3 people not gonna like it, and 4 people just gonna be on the fence about it. I think sometimes we worry about everybody who's not liking it as opposed to the people who actually felt the same way you felt.
Overnight, West's comments going viral. The backlash online, quick and unapologetic. One Twitter user saying, to say slavery was a choice isn't only deluded, it's insensitive, it's hateful, and it's demeaning. The artist later clarifying on Twitter, writing, of course I know that slaves did not get shackled and put on a boat by free will. My point is, for us to have stayed in that position, even though the numbers were on our side, means that we were mentally enslaved. He would later delete the tweets.
And that his statement was just an example of the free thought you heard him mention in the TMZ clip. West rounded out the tweet storm, saying that once again he's being attacked for presenting new ideas.
You talked to Kanye after the statement?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
What was that conversation like?
You know, Kanye had told me the context of what he was trying to say, so I understood it a little better. I think when he said slavery was a choice, in his mind, he was talking about psychological slavery. You know, in his mind, he's saying, even if I am a slave, I have a choice to remain a slave. I can revolt. I can't give you points for what you were trying to say.
Right.
I got to judge you based off what you said. What he said was slavery was a choice.
Where's Kanye's headset at right now? Is he healthy?
I really don't know. I mean, you know, in the interview we talked about mental health a lot. He spoke about being on meds, you know, so I'm on TMZ saying he was addicted to opioids. He even talked about liposuction. You know, he talked about losing all his confidence. Like, I mean, that sounds like, you know, low self-esteem.
West's reps declined our request for further comment. Tonight, some critics saying the talent behind songs like All of the Lights may just be using his latest rant as a boost for album sales. Regardless, some fans disheartened by how the icon has chosen to use his platform.
So if Kanye West, who's like not just one of the most popular black Americans, but one of the most popular Americans just across the board, if he doesn't stand a chance of just raising this question, because it's a totally valid question, then how, you know, who does?
Well, actually, he does stand a chance, because when someone like Kanye speaks out, he creates space for others to speak out.
People are seeking another place to find the truth because they're tired of the narrative. And I think this is part of that.
I think what Kanye is trying to do is open Black America's mind to the fact that perhaps we've chosen a bad strategy by swallowing all of the Democratic Party and liberalism whole. I say in my column in the Wall Street Journal that in the immediate aftermath of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, Democrats marketed to us liberalism as the solution to all of our problems, and liberalism now is like the cigarette. It's been marketed to us the same as the cigarette. Fashionable, sophisticated, it's supposed to be liberating, but I think it needs a Surgeon General's warning, hazardous to your family and all the values you were taught as a child.
Do you feel that I'm feeling, do you feel that I'm being free and I'm thinking free?
Kanye says he is on medication for his mental health, but not taking the amount his doctor wants him to.
These powerful media monopolies realize they are losing their grip on one of the most influential cultural icons of our generation, and it is causing them to panic.
We are drugged out. We are following other people's opinions. We are controlled by the media. And today it all changes.